loading and running. There's different procedures. Different procedures are recommended for different centers. For UPPMAX, NSC, and HPC2N, you will want to load the modules at the command line. That's pretty much the only option. At LUNARC, you are welcome to use the command line if you know which command line you're using. And I will go into that in a little bit more detail during the GUI, the Matlab GUI section. But it's generally recommended that you use the desktop on demand system. So if I minimize this, and you see I'm in ThinLink on LUNARC, and I realize the type up here is really small, but I'm on the Cosmos 2 login node. And if I go here, this is the applications menu. Here's where you find Matlab. And these are the ways that are recommended to run it on LUNARC. Anyway, and we'll go into more detail on that in a little bit. On PDC, it's recommended to load at the command line, and it's possible to run interactively on a compute node with S forwarding and the SLOC command, which lets you book time on a compute node, so that you're not hogging a login node by using the GUI. There is ThinLink access on Dardo, but it's restricted to 30 users for the entire Dardo cluster right now. There is discussion about adding more licenses, so hopefully this limit will not continue to hold for very much longer. But for right now, I would say avoid it, because the group of us that are teaching this course, of the 3 of us who tried getting into Dardo, we had maybe a 50% success rate getting through on ThinLink. So access is very limited on that route. For most HPC centers in Sweden have similar options. Generally, they favor the command line option. And the primary difference depends or lies in which modules are installed and how they're named. So the examples that are presented here will be similar for most HPC centers in Sweden, with some variation in naming. Very briefly, let's see, do I need to go over any of these? I should note while we're here, if you do get onto Dardo, this one is a little bit special, because when you first log into Dardo, it comes loaded with about 13 different modules, but only one of them is sticky. So if you accidentally use module purge, you're going to lose all of them. So what you want, and then you'd have to reload them one at a time and hope that you had a list of them somewhere. So not a great situation. So I would recommend that you use module save and then name it something like preloaded. And that way, if you accidentally use module purge instead of module unload, then you can reload modules from that saved collection. Anyway, that was just an aside for Dardo specifically. Just as a warning, while all the modules at UPPMAX and NSC that are not directly related to bioinformatics are shown by ML Avail, the modules at other centers may be hidden until one has loaded a prerequisite, like the compiler GCC. So all of the different centers will show you different things depending on whether you use module Avail or module Spider, and depending on which center it is that you're at, and whether their policy is to require prerequisites or not to control how ML Avail and ML Spider work. So at HPC2N, LUNARC, and PDC, you need to use module Spider and the module name to see what modules are actually available before, without the requirements of, or without having loaded the prerequisites. And then ML avail is for showing the modules that are only available given your currently loaded prerequisites. Now, unlike, say, Python or Perl or certain other languages, there is no system MATLAB that comes preloaded. But ML load MATLAB with no release date will typically load the latest release, unless your center happens to be case sensitive when loading MATLAB. Then it won't do anything. Keep in mind that the latest release of MATLAB, as with any module, is periodically updated. So for reproducibility reasons, you should always load the same release throughout a given project. New sessions on, okay, I already warned about this. The new sessions on Dart PDC start with 13 loaded modules, but only one of them is sticky, so be careful. All right, finally, we get to the check for MATLAB versions and what all is available on each system. So on UPPMAX and NSC, you just do module available MATLAB. HPC2N, you want to do module spider with MATLAB in all caps. There is a result if you use the lowercase version, but it's probably not the one that you want. And then if you load a specific version, it's all caps MATLAB / version number. So for instance, this. And you can do this too on LUNARC. Now, I want to make another note here while we're here on the LUNARC HPC desktop. If you go to favorites, you will see a terminal. This terminal runs on the login node. So be very careful what you do on this terminal. It's perfectly fine for doing things like this, like just listing the MATLAB versions. That uses hardly any memory whatsoever. So this is fine. But if you start an intensive or graphical job on this particular terminal, the job is subject to being killed without warning, and you may have angry administrators, self-included, chasing you down. So be careful. Be careful. If you want to use I'll show this again and go more into detail about it later on in the on-demand section. But if you want to run a more intensive job through a terminal, the terminals that you want are either here in Applications General. So this is this CPU terminal is for jobs that don't require any graphics. These GPU terminals are for GPU accelerated jobs. And then if you want to do visualization and running GUIs, then you want to use this graphics terminal here under Applications Visualization. All right, now that we've covered that for LUNARC, and so these are the versions that are available here on the LUNARC, or here on Cosmos, which is at LUNARC. Now for PDC, we're only covering the Dartle machine, but the commands are very similar to what they are on Cosmos. Now on Dartle, there's a special requirement, which is that you have to have a prerequisite loaded that will be called something like PDC / and then a 2-digit number dot another 2-digit number. Or there's a PDC old, and there's also, I believe, a PDC test. I don't know if PDC test is publicly accessible, but to view the prerequisites for a specific version of MATLAB, you would have to do module spider MATLAB / the version. And then that would show you which of these PDC / number versions that you need to install. So I could actually do this right now, but I don't think I have the time. I'll go back. I might come back and show a different center if we get back to this and we still have some time. Let me check the schedule. So I have another 20 minutes. So mainly we'll be using R2023B. If your center doesn't have that, just use something close. There are a lot of different options depending on the system. So the default version right now for UPPMAX is 2024B or 2023B. And be very careful with these old versions. They still technically work, but they're not as well supported. Kebnekaise, you've got all these versions. So it looks like it may only go, correct me if I'm wrong, but this only goes up to 2023A, correct?
Yep, it's not updated yet.
Okay, cool.
Soon will be. We have some issues with the configuration file for the newer one.
Okay.
Eventually.
Yes, so at LUNARC, we have up to 2024B. Whoops. Tetralith has these. If you do a module spider MATLAB, you'll also see these. You'll see MATLAB / 2023 or 2024, or what have you. You'll see both versions with just the year and these versions with -BDIST. The versions that are without the year are technically, I think they're either aliases for this or they're, I think they're aliases for this because if you only type, like, let's say you are wanting to load 2023A. If you only type this and then you do ML to see what is loaded, it will say this entire thing with the BDIST included. And at PDC, we have these options. And if you, for instance, if you want to load 2024B, you'll need to load this PDC 23.12. All right, let's get to actually running stuff. So for this, I am going to close this terminal. And just in case, and just because it's good practice for LUNARC, I'm going to go ahead to the CPU terminal and start a job here. So this is the GFX launcher, which is an interface that was developed in-house here. And here you can set job requirements like you would for Slurm in order to give yourself an allocation on a compute node instead of running on a login node. So I'll show this in more detail and go through more of the details of, or go through more of the menu options when we get to going into the on-demand desktop section in the simultaneous session. But all of these settings for right now are good, so are fine for me, or I'll just move that to my my teacher's account. So I'll go ahead and start that. And now I have a terminal that's on a compute node. See, CN108 stands for compute node 108. So again, I will do ML spider MATLAB, see the versions again. Get one I can copy. I think I will load 2023B. that. Now, if I do ML, you'll see that it's loaded some MATLAB and a few things needed to run some of the stuff that runs in the background. If you're on UPPMAX, it's fairly similar. Module load, MATLAB, R2023B. In this case, there is a capital R between MATLAB and the 2023B. And the ML being short for module load also works at UPPMAX. And it also works at HPC2N, just pretty much the same as UPPMAX, except that the MATLAB is in all caps and there's no R in front of the year. I already showed you LUNARC. On Tetralith, it's pretty similar to HPC2N, except that you should include the, it's identical to HPC2N, but it's probably a good idea to incorporate this dash BDIS just so you remember what it's actually doing. And at PDC Dardo, the prompt looks a little bit weird, and you have to load this PDC module again, but then you can load the MATLAB module that you want. And you can actually load them both in the same step. So if anybody else is familiar with the module system already, then you may have already discovered that as long as you incorporate prerequisites in the same line, you can load a bunch of different modules at the same time. Now, starting MATLAB at the command line, so most of the time you'll either run MATLAB live scripts in the GUI or basic script functions from the command line. So live scripts, like I said, can only be worked on in the GUI, but basic script or function files can be run from a batch script or the command line. At the command line, function definition is typically not supported unless the function is short and anonymous. If you define a user-defined function, you generally have to write it up and save it to a separate .m file. So if I show my MATLAB folder here, I've got a few, I've got a function here that we'll use when I show the demo. And I've got a few other functions here that are .m. So at the facilities where it's offered, the GUI is often the recommended interface. But you typically have to be careful about, again, you have to be careful about starting it and make sure that you're running it on a compute node or are only running something really, really short. And the GUI also provides some ways to set up Slurm jobs through the parallel computing toolbox. That will be discussed in a later session. But the resources required to run the GUI and those required to run a job submitted to Slurm are separate. So you don't have to worry if the maximum allocation time for the MATLAB GUI session is much less than the limit for a Slurm job. So like for instance, when I show you later how to run the MATLAB GUI from here, you'll see that you'll get a pop-up like this, and it'll have like the usage bar where it's tracking the amount of time that's been used. Those resources are only for the GUI itself. If I were to start a Slurm job within that GUI, the Slurm job parameters that I set in the GUI for that Slurm job are separate from the job parameters that are keeping the GUI running. And because it bears repeating over and over and over again, if you're starting MATLAB from the command line and you're not sure if you're on the log, if you know you're on the login node or you're not sure, use this single comp thread flag. Otherwise, MATLAB will spawn however many processes it thinks it needs up to the capacity of a full node. So most terminal instances launch MATLAB either in the GUI or on the command line in a login node by default. So if you tie up an entire node, you can disrupt the jobs and access for other users, which is a violation of the NAISS user agreement. Against a few HPC centers detect if you've started on a login node or not, and then they can set max comp threads to 1 automatically. But when in doubt, use the single comp thread to be safe. It doesn't hurt anything if you set it, but if you don't, you may end up with a horde of angry admins behind you, chasing you. Note that setting single comp thread for the flag does not prevent MATLAB from sending parallelized or multi-threaded jobs to Slurm. So how you start MATLAB depends on the center. It's a little bit different from center to center, but not very much so. If you only want to work at the command line, which is what I'm going to be showing here, the command is usually MATLAB-no display or MATLAB single comp thread no display at HPC2N. And at LUNARC, at Dardel, they have you add a few extra flags, but the no splash and no desktop flags are also included here. You can always come back to this and just click copy. Now note, if you're on Dardel and you see this please enter your MathWorks account address, blah, 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 and all this stuff. If you don't have your own MathWorks account and you can't fulfill these, what this indicates is that if you're an academic user, you should have been vetted by PDC staff first. And if you see this, something, either you haven't communicated with the PDC staff or they haven't finished setting you up. So anyway, let's see how this works on LUNARC. So I will start the command line over here. See my cursor? So MATLAB dash no display dash single comp thread. As you can see, this is loading the command line. I can do, A equals 3. And of course, if I don't use the semicolon, it prints it as well. B equals 5, semicolon. I know that this is a Swedish keyboard. Where is the semicolon? There it is. All right, and then A plus B, yeah. Okay. Now, if you want to start the GUI, at HPC2N and UPPMAX, you just omit the no display flag. And if no desktop and no splash were included, omit those as well. But you should still include the single comp thread. And this is what that looks like on Rackham and before it actually starts the GUI. For Tetralith, it depends on how intensively you plan to use the GUI. For most of the time, it's recommended that you use this interactive command. This is where you set some Slurm parameters on the command line to schedule yourself time on a compute node. So at NSC, you would do interactive. Oops, I think there's supposed to be a space between that N and that 1. So you would do interactive. The -N option is the number of nodes. That selects 1 for you. Then you can use exclusive to make sure that you have the entire node to yourself. Give yourself time. Then you can use module load, and then Matlab -software OpenGL. This is the sort of the engine that runs the GUI. For really short tasks requiring few resources, it's okay to run it on the login node, but to do that, you need VGL run Matlab and still and no software OpenGL, because it's a different graphics engine. For NSC, you don't actually need to use the single comp thread because maximum comp threads will automatically be set to 1 if you start on a login node. And at LUNARC, I'm just going to at LUNARC we use the desktop on demand system, GFX launcher. And again, it's over here under applications menu. You just go to applications, Matlab, pick whichever version you want, except for the ones that are HEP CPU. Those are special nodes that are private to the high energy physics department. So don't use the ones that have this HEP acronym next to them. Also note that if you're on LUNARC, when you pick these versions, you'll see some have CPU behind them and others don't. The ones that are CPU use CPU nodes, which are more abundant but don't have as much graphics support. We recommend these if you have short jobs that aren't very graphic intensive, or if you have more intensive jobs that don't do any graphics. If you want to do some plotting, then maybe use the Matlab year without the CPU behind it. That will get you on a node that is Intel with a graphics partition, so it has more graphics support. But the maximum time limit on a GUI session for these two differs. For the CPU version, it's the full 7 days, same as if you were to run a regular Slurm job. For the version that does not have CPU after it, the limit is 2 days, because it's on a partition that has less nodes available and is more highly subscribed. And let's see, did I miss any? Yes, Dardo. So for Dardo, I already mentioned that it's possible to use either thin link on demand or SSH with X forwarding. The X forwarding approach is highly recommended because, again, thin link access is not very reliable right now with so few thin link licenses. So if you want to do this with X forwarding, what you do is that once you're SSH'd into Dardo, well, when you SSH into Dardo, you use SSH-X and then another space and then your username at Dardo and the rest of the name of the server. Then once you're logged in, you book a compute node with this salloc command. And then you SSH again and again with the X flag into whichever node you were assigned to by salloc. So the salloc step and its output the salloc step will look something like this. I did not show the output to this, but there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 lines where they echo the where it echoes the steps that SLOC is executing in the background. If you want an entire node, the SLOC command will look like this. It's very similar to the interactive command. So if you want a full node, it's -N, the number of nodes, then you set the time with a -T, use a -A, and then the name of your project. And if you're using a full node, you use this -P, which is partition, and then main. Now, if you have a smaller job and you only need, and you don't need all 128 cores on a full node, what you can do is request a subset of the number of cores, for example, 16, by using this -C, the number of cores you want, and then selecting the -P and shared. And then SLOC will print a handful of lines about the progress of allocating and queuing your job. And then the last line of output will look something like SLOC : nodes, and then node ID and some numbers are ready for the job. Then you'll have to copy this node ID and SSH-X and the name of the node, or the ID of the node that you were assigned to. So this is an example here. You would adjust these numbers as they're shown to you, or and of course whichever version of the PDC or PDC old that you're using, and the version of Matlab. So you SSH into the compute node, load PDC, load Matlab, and start Matlab. The GUI will take a few minutes to load. It's slow, but it'll get there. If you do manage to log into Dardel via ThinLink, the process looks very similar to LUNARC, except that when you go to this applications menu, instead of applications dash, it'll say PDC dash, and then Matlab. And you won't see all these different versions. It'll just be the years. However, it will be very, very, very slow loading. And it's very, very slow loading in the ThinLink ThinLink interface, in my experience. I've yet to actually get it to run within the time that I decided to allocate. So like I gave it 30 minutes and I would always end up giving up. So again, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you use SSH with X forwarding if you're going to use Dardel. All right, time for a little code along. I already showed you the A plus B. I can do, let's say I, and then let's make a 3x3 identity matrix and see what that looks like. Looks like that. I already have this code here and saved to a file right up here at the top. So I can show you what that looks like in Emacs. Looks like that. So I just have this saved to my documents in the Matlab folder. So you kind of want to start if you're in, you want to start Matlab either in your home directory or in your documents if the folder is below the level of documents, because Matlab will be able to search basically any folder that is nested inside the folder that you're working in. So let me try running add to right here. So add to, I don't know, 17 and 24. And because I did not include a semicolon, it printed everything twice. So let's do that. Yeah. And now if you're at the Matlab command line, and you want to get out of it, you just type exit. It'll take a couple of minutes, but it'll leave. And if I close this terminal, it might take a few minutes for this to stop, but that's okay. All right, so key points. You can start MATLAB either as the GUI or with the no display flag, run it on the terminal. If you start either interface from the terminal, you must first load the correct modules. For interactive work, you usually have to reserve time on a compute node and be really, really careful if you do end up on a login node. If you do start on the login node, you want to use the single comp thread flag in the starting command to avoid hogging the login node. All right, any questions before we go to our break?